Hey everybody, Nick here, and today we're going to do a little disassembly and maintenance on this little guy for you right here. This is the Liong Mah L1. Very, very interesting knife, and I'm looking forward to taking it apart. But before we go any further, I want to highlight one important thing. Well, two important things. First off, centering is good to go. No problem there, and the action here is feeling pretty damn good too. No real complaints, and in fact, I would argue this doesn't really need to be taken apart, but because I am who I am and this channel is what it is, it's going to happen anyways. The other important thing to keep in mind is this is an integral pocket knife. Although it does have screws here and here to hold on these inlays, the handle itself is a single chunk of titanium. So, as a result, taking this guy apart is going to be a little bit more interesting and different than usual. What I'm going to go ahead and try and do here is to remove this backside here. And I believe what that's going to do is lift this part off, and there's probably going to be access to the bearings and bearing race in there. And then I should be able to get the blade out of there, and then we'll take it from there. But hopefully this will go to plan. Integral knives can often be a little bit fiddly to take apart, just because, well, they are very unusual. But also, it can work out well. So I just put my driver in here and I started to turn, and I got nowhere. And so one approach would be to just keep turning, put some grunk on it, but I don't know that that's going to be the best approach, because this might not be free spinning, right? This might be a side that is not able to rotate. And so what I'm going to do instead is switch to the other side here. And indeed, when I do, I find that I am very readily able to take this screw out. And so this is a piece of advice that I've given countless times now in my disassembly videos, but that is, don't use muscle when you need to. I mean, obviously, you will use some muscles, but don't, give it more force to push through, because if this part is not free spinning, then I just would have stripped out this screw, broken my driver, and it would have been a bad time, right? There would have been no benefit to it. So, that's always something to keep in mind. But I've gone ahead and I've pulled out the pivot screw here, and I think I'm going to be able to lift out this, what looks to be insert here. Maybe, or maybe not. The next thing that I'm going to try and do here is actually going to be to push the pivot here out. I'm going to see if the pivot starts coming out on the other side there. I'm using a little watch spring bar tool here to do this, and hopefully it'll sort of work its way out. I'm not using a whole lot of force here, because it may be that again, I might be missing something here. But at the same time, this should come apart at a certain point. I'm going to be very, very careful, though. The other thing I'm going to try and do is just lift this part out. Okay, so now I've removed this portion here. I've removed this little guy, and that can go with the pivot. And now what we see here is that, yeah, the inside here is just the pivot. This is just the other side. So I'm going to see again about pushing this guy out. Let's see. I'm going to try and do that holding onto the blade here. The reason is that takes some of the difficulty out of it, and makes it a little bit easier. Now, I should be able to just remove the blade at this point, to kind of pull it this way. I am not. Okay, so what that means is I need to take a look inside here and see what's going on. The stop pin is not internal to the knife. So that's good. It's not like riding inside the blade. So that's not why I can't pull the blade. It may just be that I need to give... Okay, it's coming loose now. I needed to lift up the... Okay, good. This is actually easier than I had feared. Because, and the reason I say that is that what we see here is that there are bearing races on both sides. And it looks, in fact, like there's a set of stainless steel washers in there, which is good. But the bearings themselves are recessed into the blade here, which makes it much easier to take this guy apart and put it back together, because to reassemble, I just slide this whole package back in there. I was just having to use a little bit more force than I initially did, and that's okay. Again, I'm taking my time. I'm not using force, at least when I can. If I were a Jedi, I'd use the force, but I don't use force. And now I'm going to go on ahead and start cleaning things off. If you're curious, by the way, about this fabric swatch, this screwdriver, the spring bar tool, or any other things I'm using, go ahead and check out dickshabazz.com/tools, which has a full listing of all of the tools that I use for my disassemblies on a regular basis. Should be interesting for you. And so we'll go on ahead and put that in there. That, of course, being a plug. I've cleaned off the bearings there. Those should be cleaned off and good to go. They literally are cleaned off. I just finished saying that they were cleaned off. But nonetheless, and then I'll wipe off the blade here. It's worth noting that this is basically fresh from the factory. So there's really not that much in there to clean out and degunk. But occasionally you can get some improvements just by cleaning off factory, cleaning off the factory stuff. Okay, beautiful. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and slip a Q-tip in here and just kind of wipe off the stainless steel washers on which those bearings ride. We see there was a little tiny bit of gunction on there, not too bad though. So we are pretty much good to go back together. One other thing that's worth noting here, by the way, is that this little part here lifted out when this pivot came out. That little part is protecting the stop pin because we want to have a stop pin that we can, like that's how they inserted the stop pin originally. You need to have that be a little bit separated because, well, otherwise you can't install it, right? So yeah, there is that. And this is in fact one entire chunk. And I'm not, oh, okay, this whole thing is a single piece, including this little bit here, which means that I literally could not have turned this guy out of its place there, right? So I'm glad that I switched to the other side when I did, because this wouldn't have been able to turn freely because, well, there's this little bit up here. I'm going to see if I can wipe off that little part here. No, that just seems like a little bit of wear through the plating or something along those lines. All right, so at this point in time, we are ready to put this guy back together. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is start off by using a little bit of your, let's take some knife pivot lube, and I'm going to go ahead and drip some knife pivot lube right into here. Come on, there we go. A little bit of KPL right there. And that will distribute itself along the detent ball path. I'm also going to put a little bit inside the bearing race here. I'm over-lubricating slightly. Oh no, me? Over-lubricate? Never. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side, letting the bearing fall out of the other side because I am not a brilliant man. But anyways, I'll put that in here, and then I'll rotate. And then I'll take this guy, and I will put it here. And then I'll drop the other side. Damn, I'm good. You all should probably be looking for a better reviewer once you finish this video. I think you'll have a better time of it. And then what I'm going to do, actually, is I'll go ahead and put a little bit onto the pivot itself. The reason for that is twofold. One, it will help the pivot seat itself, but two, it'll also help the knife blade itself rotate around the pivot. So my goal here is going to be to just sort of insert this pivot here again, or insert the blade again. Now, it's worth noting that I won't be able to fully insert it with the lock bar all the way down in there, right? It won't work well because the lock bar, by definition, needs to press back against the pivot here for things to work. So what I've done is I've kind of got it in a half-open position. Now I'm going to place this pivot back into its proper home here. I'm rotating it a little bit just to distribute that oil. But okay, I've got the pivot in sort of a rough position here. I want it to be able to drop in, and I'm going to go on ahead and there we go. Okay, so it is through the first part. Now it's just going to be a question of moving the blade itself. Oh, there. And I kind of need to look through the other side. So what I'm going to do is actually take this guy. This is the part that gets a little tiny bit fiddly. I got this guy in place. Now I'm going to look through the other side here, and as I do so, that'll let me kind of see, if I kind of poke in here, that should let me see, okay, right now there's a little bit of extra blade down at the bottom, and right now I'm starting to get this seated, so I'm just going to kind of continue to press up from the back side here using my index finger, and I've got things oriented such that this tab should go in the place it needs to. But at a certain point, and the other thing I'm going to do is use my thumb to remove any lock bar pressure. But yeah, so I'm just sort of slowly but surely pushing this pivot through. I'm not quite there yet. Like I'm clearly engaged for part of it, but I'm not fully engaged. And right now it's, there we go. Okay, so we just slipped down a little bit further. That's good. What I'm going to go ahead and do is just press this the rest of the way through. And I want to make sure it's aligned properly, so I'm not trying to seat the pivot in a place it cannot be seated. And then by using my thumb here to unlock the knife a little bit, I was able to seat it a little bit deeper in there. And in fact, we see that this is now fully seated. Now what I got to do is just go to the other side here. That was not necessarily the most straightforward thing ever, but it worked out. Again, very little force was required there. Next thing, I'm going to drop this little collar back in place, right here. Is this the proper orientation? Does it matter? The tolerances on this thing are very tight, I have to say. Like, all of the pieces fit very exactly, which is nice. And then I'll take a little bit of blue thread locker here, put it on the pivot, and then I will just insert. And I'm backing it off a little bit just to make sure I'm not cross-threading. And there we go. Just tighten down. This is probably going to be a knife where I can tighten it fully and it still runs beautifully. Indeed, I've tightened it fully and it still runs beautifully. Yeah, there's no blade play at all. It is dead centered. Yeah, we're good to go. This knife has now been disassembled and maintained. That was actually, it was a little bit finessey, if that makes sense, but it wasn't particularly hard. As long as you understand that, don't turn this side right, and then just make sure that you're manipulating the various things like lock bar tension, etc. It took a little finesse, but it wasn't a particularly difficult disassembly. It just might take a little bit if you're not used to doing those kinds of things. But there you go, all set. Let's go on ahead and, put this guy in the pocket and carry it for a little while. Then I'll get you a full review. Hope this has been interesting to you. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.